recently reviewed like all the big wildlife zooms, but people had one request. They said, we don't care so much about that stuff, but we need it to be light. I am hiking with it. I'm on a kayak with it. So here we are. I found the two lightest weight wildlife rigs available. This is the Canon R7 with their 100 to 400 and the Olympus OM-1 with the OM-100 to 400. They both come in at under 4 pounds, and when you zoom or crop to 800 millimeters, they still have more than 20 megapixels. So let's get some shots and see which is better. We couldn't film the whole thing from a kayak. We're gonna guide you through these two cameras, the 5,000 pictures that we took with them, and figure out which one is right for you. But first I want to talk about the things that they have in common.
Well, they're both mirrorless cameras. They both have 2 card slots.
They both have flip forward screens in case you want to use it for vlogging or something else. They both have the DSLR style design with the viewfinder in the middle, which is really good for using telephoto lenses. And they both have animal eye detect.
Let's talk about where the design differs though, because the Olympus is 37% heavier and 70% more expensive.
But it does feel like more camera. Like when you hold it in your hand, you're like, oh, this feels like a professional camera. And Olympus has this reputation for making everything weatherproofed, which can be really important for wildlife photography because you can get caught in a rain. But I don't know how to test that.
Well, I know how, but I'm not
willing to do
for
it.
that. If you guys want to send us money to ruin a camera, okay. An important element in wildlife photography is actually the viewfinder. They have to be fast enough, and for me, I like them to be crystal clear because if you like taking pictures of wildlife, you enjoy looking at nature, and you don't want it to be pixelated and ugly.
The Olympus has about twice the resolution in the viewfinder, and I noticed that. Like we switched cameras back and forth, and sometimes you're not taking pictures, something's too far away, the lighting's not right, but you just watch the animal's behavior, like watching that kingfisher just sort of stab and beat that fish. It was so cool and pleasant, and it was a little nicer on the Olympus. So for those times when you're just enjoying things, the Olympus might be worth the extra money.
It's not just about that, there's a practical reason too. If you get a photo and you want to know if it's sharp and you go to zoom in and look through your viewfinder, if it's not good quality, it could still leave you questioning if your photo is sharp as you want it.
Let's take a walk and talk about more specific comparisons that we've made. Hey, whichever of these cameras you decide to buy, please use our links. That helps support our channel and helps us bring you unbiased reviews. See, we've never been sponsored by a camera or lens manufacturer, but we are sponsored by Adorama, our favorite camera store, the place that gives you VIP points. Every time you buy something, you get points that you can spend on future purchases. The place with human beings who can help you make important buying decisions. Easy returns, lots of inventory in stock, and a great staff that really understands creators. Anytime you buy anything photography related, please use our link to go to Adorama. Thanks for sponsoring us.
Let's talk about the sharpness of these two setups. Overall, we noticed that the Olympus was sharper, and we think it's because it's a higher quality lens, and you can feel that in the build like we talked about, but keep in mind it's more expensive than the Canon lens. We noticed it was especially sharper when we were dealing with side lighting, where we couldn't really figure out why the Canon looked so bad, and we realized we don't have a lens hood, so you'll have to buy one to go on this, whereas the Olympus has a little one built in, and it made a world of a difference. The Olympus is 20 megapixels and it has a 2x crop. And the Canon is 33 megapixels with a 1.6 crop.
The Canon's extra megapixels let you crop, digitally zoom to 800 millimeters while still maintaining 20 megapixels. However, the slower lens at that point is at an equivalent f/16, a full stop slower than the Olympus. That's why we see so much less background blur when shooting at long distances. And the shallower depth of field on the Olympus did improve the picture quality.
Dynamic range is incredibly important in wildlife photography. So we're always shooting raw files because sometimes you have to expose for a bright background and there's a dark subject and you have to recover the shadows. And the Canon here has a sensor that's twice as big. So I thought it was going to really beat the Olympus, but it was about a tie. Like we had a lot of real world images that we recovered, and some of them look better on the Canon and some of them look better on the Olympus. I almost lost my balance there. So for dynamic range, it's a tie.
When it came to autofocus and subject detection, they both work very well. I will say that the Olympus seemed to have a better subject detection system, and that means that when I was pointing at a bird, it was locking onto it, but that didn't necessarily mean it was always getting it. You're gonna hit your head. But that didn't necessarily mean it was always getting it in focus. They both struggled to get a subject in focus if there was a cluttered background, and often it was jumping to the trees in the background instead of the bird flying in the foreground, and that was frustrating. I think they both have great autofocus and animal eye detect autofocus, so you could be happy with either one.
That's the sound of the Canon's mechanical shutter, and it ended up being a bit of a problem. See, both these cameras have electronic shutters that can shoot silently, and as a wildlife photographer, silent shutter is so important because you don't want to disturb the wildlife. The Canon has a problem with its electronic shutter though, in that it shows rolling shutter. And as you look at these pictures here, you'll see that it turned the straight lines in the background diagonal whenever we were tracking a flying bird. And that meant that I couldn't use the silent electronic shutter. I had to use the mechanical shutter. That has another downside. Besides making a lot of noise, it slows the camera down. That drops the Canon from an amazing 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter to only 15 frames per second with the mechanical shutter. I say only, but 15 frames per second is a lot. And in fact, for frames per second, the Canon definitely wins. But the Olympus here, the electronic shutter worked really well. It had some rolling shutter. You can see some slanting of the lines, but it wasn't too disturbing. And it technically does 20 frames per second with the electronic shutter while tracking autofocus. But real world, I counted about 13 frames per second because it took a little bit of time between each frame to autofocus, and that was enough to slow it down. So we can do 13 frames per second silently with the Olympus, or 15 frames per second loudly with the Canon. And overall, it ends up pretty much being a wash, but the Canon does have a little bit better frames per second, but the Olympus is better at silent shooting.
Let's talk about low light performance of both of these cameras. That's important with wildlife because often you're in the woods or in a darker place where you might have to bump up your ISO to get your photo bright enough. The Canon has a larger sensor, but the lens is about a half a stop slower. And the Olympus has a smaller sensor, but the lens is faster, so they both end up being about the same. When it came to stabilization, we were able to find a still bird and take photos at as low as a shutter speed as possible. And the stabilization on the Canon was quite a bit better. About half of the photos were sharp, and with the Olympus, about 20% of them were sharp. So the stabilization is quite a bit better on the Canon. If you want either of these excellent cameras, be sure to check out Adorama. They're sponsoring this video, and they make unbiased reviews like this possible, but they also make buying all photo and video gear possible, because if you can imagine it, they have it, from lenses and cameras and lights and stands and backpacks and computers, everything. And they have a VIP program where you can collect points, apply them to your future purchases, and save money. What's better than that? Use our links down below, and thank you for watching our video, and thank you Adorama for making this possible. What is our conclusion here?
Well, the Canon is lighter and less expensive, but the Olympus was sharper and it has a much more functional electronic shutter, like silent shutter.
I also think the construction feels a little nicer.
For people looking for the lightest, cheapest possible rig, Canon, I think, has taken the crown away from Micro Four Thirds, shockingly. But Olympus here still, I think, produces better results.
I think so too.
It costs more too, and is heavier.
I also would say that you have to buy a lens hood for this because it did kill the quality on some of our photos that were side lit, whereas the Olympus has a little built-in one. So that's one more little thing you'll have to buy. Thanks for watching, and let us know down below if you'd like us to review anything else, if there's a specific setup you're looking for, and we'll take it into consideration.
Bye.
Mentally, I'm tired, but physically, I'm also tired.